Hey everyone, good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight at General Assembly. My name is Derek. We're here to present Tim Wu, talk about net neutrality, politics of entrepreneurship. If you have any questions, we're going to have a conversation and jump right into it. So grab the microphone so everyone online can hear you.
Great.
Yeah.
All right, so start. All right, I guess I'm on. Hi everybody, thanks for coming. My name's Tim Wu. I'm a candidate for Lieutenant Governor in the September 9th primary coming up. And I'm also a professor at Columbia Law School. And my topic today is the politics of entrepreneurship. And I want to tell you, I'm only going to talk for about 15 minutes because we can ask questions. I think it's more interactive. And I want to give you an idea of what we're going to talk about here today. I want to talk a little bit about why I've decided to run for office. And I think what is at stake when you talk about the politics of entrepreneurship. You know, the political process and how it affects entrepreneurs, how it affects small business, how it affects what this economy looks like, both in this city and in this state. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. As I said earlier, I'm running for Lieutenant Governor position in New York. There's a Democratic primary on September 9th. Hopefully, those of you who are New York residents will vote in it. And let me tell you a little bit about why I decided to run. I see New York City, I see New York State as places that in so many ways are the best in the world. We have the best business, we have the best restaurants, we have some of the best architecture, culture, arts, you name it. But when it comes to politics, we always seem like we're decidedly third rate, particularly Albany politics. Sometimes it kind of feels embarrassing. Every time you pick up the newspaper, you read about someone being indicted or thrown in jail for corruption. And I ran because I wanted Albany politics, I wanted state politics to be better. I thought people should get into it, enough just complaining and actually do something. And second of all, because I have a particular passion for what makes an economy work, what conditions create entrepreneurship and make it possible for small micro businesses, medium-sized businesses, everyone to innovate. What differentiates the regions or the cities in the country and the world that seem to just succeed and always have new companies entering the markets, and what happens into other places that they seem to stagnate and not do so well. And I'm very curious about that, and I believe the politics of entrepreneurship makes a big difference. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a professor, as I said. I have done various things. I've worked in the federal government. I've worked in academia. I've worked in the private sector. I've also started a few companies over my life. The first company, I'll tell you about my first two companies. I started both of them when I was 15 years old. Company number one was a hot dog stand, which we opened to compete with our high school cafeteria, which we believed had high prices and poor quality food. The key to our business was we figured out that hot dogs cost 50 cents, including everything, and we sold them for $1.50. Which was cheaper than anything on the cafeteria menu. At our height, remember I was 15, so this wasn't a big deal. We're selling 100 hot dogs a week, making $100. Which to me was a fortune. My second business, about the same time, I don't know if you call it a business, but we had a BBS, bulletin board system, an online kind of tiny version of the internet that was in my basement. People would call in, log in, play online games or whatever. Now, both of these businesses went out of business very quickly, within a year, but for opposite reasons. The hot dog business, well, let me talk about the bulletin board business. So, you know, people would call in your house. We had a 2400 baud modem, 20 megabyte hard drive. People could log into our house. There you went. What happened to that business is that something else came along. It was called the internet. And it was a lot better. It wasn't actually the internet, it was AOL, it was CompuServe, it was all these electronic bulletin boards, and they were way better, and we just called it. So we lost out because of innovation. We died a natural death. Hot dog business was a different story. The cafeteria was concerned about their flagging sales, and they called the health inspectors on us. They said we had to have running water, we had to have people wearing gloves and hairnets, and all. It was just me and my brother. My brother, who started 3 or 4 other companies. That was the end of that. So what it reveals, this anecdote, the story, is that there are sort of noble and ignoble reasons that businesses get killed. There are legitimate reasons. You're beaten by a better product. Innovation happens. Who knows what? Your product isn't popular. And there are ignoble reasons, which mainly have to do either with entrenched business or with incumbent or with government killing what otherwise would be a good business. So let me now talk, I don't want to go on forever, about 4 things I'm going to discuss which I think tend to hurt opportunity, tend to damage, 10 political things that tend to damage in New York State and potentially damage a climate of opportunity. First is you have to have, both at the federal and state level, appropriate enforcement of the antitrust laws and oversight of things like mergers. Right now we're in the midst of a situation where Comcast, Philadelphia cable company, is attempting to buy our cable system in New York State, Time Warner Cable, which is most New Yorkers' cable system. And if we do not scrutinize this merger, in fact, we do not block this merger, I suggest it would be bad for the health of the tech industry, bad for the health of the content creation industry, bad for the health of innovators all across New York State when the new master comes to town and says, if you have a new product, a new idea, maybe we should check whether Comcast likes it first. So it is really important that states and the federal government take a serious role in not letting certain things get too big, or if they do get too big, making sure they don't engage in anti-competitive practices that can hurt small business. Number 2, I would suggest that in this state, I'm running as a progressive Democrat, but nonetheless, I think in this state we sometimes have a culture of over-regulation when it comes to high-tech companies. There is a problem where sometimes, faced with something new and interesting, whether it's Lyft, whether it's Bitcoin, whether it is Airbnb, our approach has been to regulate first and ask questions later. Now, I want to suggest that there are often good reasons. There are public interest reasons that we maybe have to be serious about these kind of companies. I don't believe in anarchy. But I believe that we should take time and be careful, very careful about how we regulate new ideas without assuming immediately, particularly when the hotel industry, in the case of Airbnb, or the taxi industry, or whatever incumbent industry is threatened, believes that these kind of companies should not be doing business in New York. It's a national-wide problem. You only have to look at the story of Telsa trying to get dealerships across the country. This isn't a problem in New York, but it's a problem in a lot of places. They simply will not let Tesla, I keep saying the name wrong, sell cars directly. A third thing, and then I'll finish with the final thing. The third issue that I think is really important for preserving a sense of opportunity in this state is the issue of immigration. Now, immigration is mainly a federal issue. Most of the immigration laws are federal, but there is a state-by-state debate going on right now whereby some states are saying, we don't really welcome immigrants. We're concerned about them. If a cop finds an immigrant, someone they suspect, maybe based on how they look, they're going to see whether their documentation is right and maybe report to the immigration authorities. I'm thinking of Arizona and Texas, states falling into this line. But there's another way of doing it. Massachusetts and Utah are states which have taken the lead in saying, we welcome immigrants. We want there to be more immigrants here. Massachusetts has done a great job in hacking the H-1B system, where they're getting more H-1B visas for highly skilled workers than other states using special, clever legal hacks. Those of you who are legal hackers will appreciate that. And I think New York State needs to take the lead, the historic home of immigration, and say we are going to be a place that welcomes immigrants, where people come to find their life, to make an opportunity. We want New York to be a place that people come. Maybe, I bet many of you in this audience, how many of these people in the audience are from New York State? So a few, but many people come to New York State. It's not unusual or New York City, because they feel that this is a land of opportunity, and we still have that, but we need to protect it and make it clear that this is where people come to make it. And we can do that. I propose, you want to ask questions later. I propose something which I've actually borrowed from Utah. Utah, believe it or not, has become an incredibly welcoming state to immigrants. and they have something called the Utah Compact. I propose something called the New York Compact, which is a 4 or 5 point plan. 5-point plan. Should figure out which I think it is. That explains exactly how we want to treat immigrants, how we want to make it clear that this is still a land of opportunity. The final thing I want to say, and this is very quick, is just to say that we need to take on the problem of corruption in state government, because ultimately in a corrupt environment, incentives get warped. If you believe that in order to succeed with your business, ultimately, once you get large enough, that you need to seek the favors of government, seek the favors of the administration, hand out bribes, or somehow do what they want to do, it creates a very kind of different business environment than one that feels like a level playing field. It's a difference that's actually reflected in the whole idea of net neutrality when you get down to it, is that people should be able to get their start, compete fairly, have the same chance as anyone else without having to seek favors, in net neutrality's case, from the big carriers, in the case of corruption, from government. So that's all I want to do. These are just some ideas I'm throwing out there. I'm really interested in answering questions. You can ask about anything in the style. We just did a Reddit AMA yesterday, and thank you so much for coming.
Anyone has a question?
Sure.
Well,
I think they want you to use the mic.
You know what?
I think they want you to use the mic.
Okay. Well,
Sure.
would just like to start with the role of Lieutenant Governor itself.
Sure, great.
Give us sort of a quick overview of what you can do in that position, or what any person in that position can do. Let's say,
Right.
assuming that, for example, the governor or maybe others in government in Albany disagree with your agenda.
So that's a great question. So the post of lieutenant governor is not one that probably most people as child sit around, I want to be a lieutenant governor. In fact, most people I doubt knew, I don't know if I had a clear idea, say 5 years ago what lieutenant governor was. I see lieutenant governor as a position that has been often one of wasted potential. It is a constitutional position. It has its own budget. It has its own powers. The lieutenant governor is the president of the state senate. And as I understand the position, as I am running as what I call an independent lieutenant governor. And I believe that I do not have to follow the orders of the governor, and I could pursue my own objectives, my own advocacy, absent the permission of the governor. What would this mean in practice? As I envision the position, the lieutenant governor would do two types of things. Actually, three types of things. First of all, in New York State, we have a closely divided Senate. And the lieutenant governor, as the president of the Senate, has a tie-breaking vote when the two sides are deadlocked. And so on a lot of issues, whether it's marijuana reform, whether it's clemency issues, whether it's immigration, it's often evenly matched, and the lieutenant governor's vote matters in those situations. So in a lot of really sensitive issues, I think the lieutenant governor, even the threat of the vote will change things. And I have progressive positions we can talk about. But the other two roles I see as the roles of the lieutenant governor as follows. First of all, I think the lieutenant governor can bring attention to issues that are not getting adequate attention right now. A good example is the Comcast-Time Warner merger, which everyone seems to think is completely the responsibility of the federal government to deal with, when in fact the state can block it and the state should block it. The state has the power to block the merger in New York State. Our own calculations suggest that the merger of Time Warner and Comcast will cost citizens of New York State an extra $1.6 billion per year, and I'll tell you why that is. The average Time Warner bill is $104 a month. Comcast, through its various machinations and data caps and other things, and maybe some other services, gets $156 per month average from its customers. So if they are successful in figuring out how to get the same amount of money out of New Yorkers, that'll mean an extra $1.6 billion per year for the cable companies. Not to mention the fact that every media company, and if they have their way and they knock out net neutrality, every tech company has to deal with Comcast It threatens to further extract more money from the media industries and the content industries and tech companies, particularly those who use video. So anyway, that's the kind of issue that I think is not getting attention, and I think it would be important for the Lieutenant Governor to say, listen, talk to the media, talk to the public. This is an issue that people really should be focused on doing something about. Finally, I think often there are issues in Albany where it's really important to have an independent voice. You know, these aren't issues that are not being discussed, but someone needs to weigh in independently. I'll give you an example. The Moreland Commission, which is currently occupying a lot of space. For those of you who aren't aware, the governor created an anti-corruption commission last year, but then then the anti-corruption commission got corrupted. In other words, when the anti-corruption commission he set up, he said there's an independent commission, they can do anything they want. When they started investigating sensitive parties, allies of the governor, donors, his staff sent orders to withdraw subpoenas and worked hard on the final reports that they did to make sure they didn't mention any allies or donors, and finally shut down the entire commission itself as too dangerous and said, oh, it did its work, it's done. So believe it or not, the amount of criticism, you know, the New York Times wrote this big expose July 23rd of this year, interviewing a lot of people behind the scenes saying that this got corrupted. There has been almost no criticism of the governor in Albany because people are too afraid. Well, I'll tell you one thing, I'm not afraid of almost anything. Maybe scorpions. You know, I'm just not, I have my own office, I'm just not afraid, and I will be a critical voice of the governor or of other parts of government when they go too far. I'll support them when they're doing the right thing, why not? When they go too far, I'll be critical. And I think Albany desperately needs checks and balances, desperately needs people calling out wrongful behavior. So that's a slightly long-winded answer to your question. But that's how I view, if you're interested in state constitutional law, I have an entire white paper on how I envision the role of the independent lieutenant governor. There are other states who do this too, and I don't want to go too much. California, in the personality of Gavin Newsom, he's kind of an independent guy. Texas and Vermont both have highly independent lieutenant governors. Any other questions?
Hi.
Oh, great. Oh,
I work at a tech company, so just you understand where I'm not coming from. Why are you so focused on tech companies and bettering their situation, given that the vast majority of low-income individuals in this state are going to be people who are going to be employees of non-tech companies, and that furthermore, the kind of laws and regulations that would promote their well-being and enhance their work stability are the sort of things that tech companies of all sizes kind of fear and run away from traditionally, including a lot of European protections from getting laid off at will, things like that.
It's a great question, and I welcome it. I would suggest today that I've not given you the entirety of my platform as Lieutenant Governor. I've been talking about the particular question of an opportunity platform and of particular policies for the tech industry because I regard this as a tech event. So I just want to make that clear. This is not the entirety of everything we have to say. And in fact, Zephyr and I both, my running mate, Zephyr Teachout, running for governor, are both obsessed with the problem of inequality in our times and obsessed with just the problem, the basic problem that, you know, when you really think about it, the question of whether this country is actually getting better or is wealthier than it was 50 years ago. I mean, I often, you look at your parents sometimes, you're like, wow, they have these big houses, they had, they only worked 8 hours a day, they had a reasonable job, are we actually getting richer as an entire society? This is an obsession of ours, and I don't want to suggest that that my interest in how you create a successful entrepreneurial economy is the totality and the solution, the magic bullet to everything that ails our country today, particularly the problems of gross inequality. So is there a tension between the kind of policies that stimulate, this is the hardest part of your question, is there an inherent tension between the policies that stimulate an entrepreneurial economy and the positions that foster wealth in this country, a middle class, an economy that works for everyone? I don't believe the tension is that strong, and I'll tell you why. My belief is that we are moving back as an economy and as a country to where we were before the 20th century, to a more decentralized model, small business-driven model of the entire economy. And I think that was ultimately a more equal society. I think if you look back to, say, 1850, Now, it wasn't like we were all poor. I'm moving back centuries here. I see a broad change in how the economy is becoming structured and a mover to smaller ones. And I think a lot of the grossest forms of inequality have come from over-centralization of the economy. So the entrepreneurial stuff that I support are measures towards a more decentralized economy, which ultimately I think leads to a fairer economy. The problem, I mean, there's a lot of, 20th century was, this is getting a little academic, but the 20th century was a giant experimentation with the powers of scale, giant companies, giant government, everything big. I believe philosophically we need to move back to small, and I think that will be fair and restore some of the frontier spirit where naturally everybody is equal, because great inequality actually is a function of scale. The economics of scale are what would lead to the greatest forms of inequality.
We have a question from our online audience,
Sure.
from Thea, and then we'll get back to our in-person audience. Thea wants to know, does the ability to start fairly and compete also apply to those running for elective office? And
Good
if
question.
so, how would you change the system in New York State?
That's a fantastic question. So I have been firsthand a part of the experience of trying to run for ballot as an outsider, as basically someone who was, in March, just basically sitting on my couch. Well, teaching, doing my job, but not like not like spending my whole life. I'm an outside. Not like knowing which super PACs are going to support us and all this kind of stuff. And I view the business economy and the political economy as both systems where I think the barriers to entry are really important. What makes them more or less dynamic, this is a little academic, what makes them more or less dynamic and interesting is how hard is it to get in. So here's the things we have found. First of all, in order to get on the ballot in New York, you need to collect 15,000 petitions. However, in every county in the state, which seems pretty fair. However, incumbents automatically challenge you, and so we found we had to collect 45,000 in order to have a chance. We had to spend, I don't want to really state because I might get it wrong how much money that costs, but it costs you have a lot of volunteers, but you also have to pay people to do this, and it can cost 6 figures just as a starting point. Then you get challenged, and you need to spend legal fees trying to defend yourself on the ballot, and we just got through this. We just won a big court case on Monday, which kept Zephyr on the ballot. They dropped their challenges against me. So there's a huge amount of money that was spent immediately on the problem of getting on the ballot and legal fees defending yourself on the ballot. That's not money I think is really well spent in a democracy. Where is that money going to? It's useless. I mean, there should be some petitions, you need some support. But the idea you have to get in these complex legal battles in order to run for office for regular people is a terrible thing. And so I think that the petitioning process should be reformed. The next problem, and this is a challenging problem, is that everyone knows that you need a certain amount, at least this is the way it is today, you need a certain amount of visibility, advertising, and that is incredibly expensive in New York State, particularly New York City, to get basic messages out on old media. The answer, I think, there's more than one answer. One answer is, and one answer has been, the internet often supplies ways for smaller people to reach voters, reach interested people. And that's happened a lot for us. Whether it's events like this, whether it's Twitter, whether it's CrowdTilt, where we've been crowdsourcing some of our legal fees. There are ways that the internet helps equalize. But it doesn't fully equalize, and in fact, the terror effect of broadcast advertising is huge. So the real answer is public financing of the elections. What is that? This is a system New York City has, whereby for every dollar you raise, the system adds in $5 more, so you end up with $6. So we've raised about, or will raise, or have raised about $500,000. If it were multiplied by 6, we'd be at $3 million. And once you reach that sort of level, you're basically on a par. That's a system New York City has. That's a system the New York State should have. And I think it would do a lot to reduce the barriers to entry. The final thing I should say is it's too hard to vote compared to other things. Everything else is getting more and more easy to do. I mean, I went on, you can go on like Amazon or whatever other your favorite website is. You can order like glow-in-the-dark shoelaces, and they come like next day. And then you're like, okay, I want to vote. All right, how do I register? And like you enter this process, which is comparable only like trying to go to the DMV or something. It's a really complicated process to register to vote. Switching party affiliations takes forever. So as everything gets easier, and you kind of expect, okay, fresh directors bring my tomatoes, I'm ready or whatever. And then voting is this incredibly hard thing. I think fewer and fewer people will register, fewer and fewer people vote. So I support any measure that makes it easier to register. Online voting is a little challenging because obviously there's potential fraud problems. But anything that ultimately makes it easier, I think the state should be investing in. And of course, the problem is there's a system. Nobody who's in power now favors anything that makes it easier to challenge people. Why would they? It's the exact same thing you have in the economy. Once people climb up the ladder, they like to pull up the ladder behind them. We have the same problem in business all the time. And so there's very little momentum for these changes. But I personally think they would make this state a lot interesting. And just on a personal note, I think running for politics seems so discouraging people. They don't really know how to get started, that people don't do it. It's weird that it's so much harder to figure out how to run for office than something just like starting a company, which you think would be a lot harder. But actually running for office is almost as complicated. And so you just have less people doing it. People think, that's not really me. It's too weird. I don't know how I would do it. And I really think we need to change that if we want to save this republic. I think that we need regular people to go into politics. I mean, when I mean regular, I mean people who are not creatures, who've not, maybe that's not the best word. But I kind of mean it. There's something like you've been sort of, working inside the party, it's sort of, just like regular people, the original vision that people take a point in their life, they've been doing whatever they've been doing. All right, now I'm going to go in politics for a while, try and be involved in something. It could be very local, state politics, whatever it is, and then, and then maybe go back to their life. It's an interesting break, and I think in a republic of citizens, as this country was meant to be, it would be a normalcy. It would be like, okay, people do that for a while. It's part of their civic duty. That's what it means to be a citizen. Voting is part of it too, but a lot of more regular people running for politics. Then politics wouldn't be so weird. It's so weird and so obscure, partially because I feel like ordinary people don't get into it. So, take another question.
Do you think money in politics is the problem there?
Actually, I'll just say yes. I think the answer is yes. One of the things, I was surprised by two things when I started running for office. It's an interesting experience to run for office. It's one of those life experiences that makes you see the world differently, like your brain gets rewired slightly. And here's what's bad and here's what's good. What's bad is that so much in politics is focused on money and resources. And when you're not in front of voters, everyone's like, I was talking about some stands I had on immigration or something. Someone's like, well, who's that going to raise from? That's like the immediate question. Who does this help you raise money from to take these policies? Like a lot of policies, that's immediately think, how does this pay out? And that's a terrible way to think about policy. It's the worst way you can think about policy. It's like, how is this going to pay? But that's how the system incentivizes you. How does this make you look to potential very rich donors? Does it make you look bad? Well, then maybe you should not think about it. This is why the Democratic Party, which is supposed to be a progressive party, which you think would be the natural party to be tough on Wall Street, to be tough on concentrated wealth, to want to break up big companies, is incredibly shy of those positions because in their heads, off goes a light bulb, and that light bulb is called donors. And it's scary. I can even feel it myself, even even been in politics a couple of months. You start saying something and you think, and like it's almost automatic. So this money on the mind thing is a real problem in politics. Also, I'll say, the other way politicians' minds get rewired is if they raise from a small group of donors, if they have bases, then their interests just stick with them all the time. It's the same problem I just described. Here's what's good, surprisingly good about politics, is when you run, people come out of nowhere to support you. Sometimes I feel like I'm on a marathon. People come out with like water or sponges, just like to hand them over to you. Just random people come out and say, I support you, I like what you're doing. But that is just great. I don't know why. It's like, all right, you're out there, I support what you're doing, go for it. And that is what keeps me going. But I agree, just to take to your bottom, money is, in some ways, because money is just the wrong value. And I guess that's what comes down to it. When you're always thinking, what is this going to mean for my donors? What is this going to mean for my ability to raise money? When that is your compass, where the fuck is that going to lead you?
Hi, I was actually curious.
Who am I talking to? Oh, way over there, sure.
I was actually curious, what will you do to guarantee that H-1B visa recipients will receive a fair market wage for their labor and won't be used as a tool against existing tech industry employees?
It's a decent question. There is some controversy over H-1B visas. I don't know if I can personally guarantee, I don't know if I can personally guarantee, but I am a strong supporter of policies that guarantee that people are not paid differently for their labor if they're of equal standing. So I think some people have raised the issue whether H-1B visa recipients are not paid the same. And I think any activity of that form that is discriminatory should be looked into and talked seriously about. I don't think I can guarantee it. But I also do think that we have a shortage of H-1B visas. My policy remains that I think we need more of them, and I particularly think we need more in New York.
Hi, I'm a business owner in New York City. And one of my big expenses every month is my internet service provider. You mentioned earlier Time Warner is the biggest one in New York State. And now with the Comcast merger, I'm wondering if there's anything that can be done to encourage competition with things like Verizon, Fios, or other internet service providers, because it seems kind of like a monopoly when they have certain territories and you have no choice as a consumer.
Right. I first of all want to pick up on what you're talking about, is that we have let many of the necessities of life become just too expensive. And that sounds very basic, but I think it's true. If you look at cable service, I said Comcast is average price per the average price per customer that they extract is $156 a month. That is a big item in poor people's budgets and middle-income people's budgets. Now, you could say maybe people shouldn't have television, but Americans have to have television. I'm not quite sure why that's our norm, but that's the way it's been established. People see this as an essential. And overall, our communication bills have just become enormous. When you add up a home phone if you have one, a cell phone, cable, internet access, cable TV, when you add it up, sometimes the budget is more than you spend on electricity and everything else. And it's a serious problem. And as you pointed out, the problem is twofold. There is no competition in many areas, or if there is competition, it's only two companies. So they often take almost exactly the same prices. Or and there's no serious rate regulation. So there's two things you can do about it. Number one, you can try and encourage more competition. This has been something the government's been trying to do for about 10 years. Actually, not 10 years, 20 years. I was in Silicon Valley in the late 90s. And at that time, there were hundreds of businesses whose goal it was to bring internet service for cheaper somehow or another. There was one company that was making these little robots that would crawl through the sewers and crawl up into your toilet with, through the plumbing with like a fiber optic cable behind it. Actually, I thought it was a pretty cool idea. I saw the robot itself. It was like everyone gets the idea? Problem is you want to have fiber in people's homes. It's hard to get people's homes. And so you design robots that can crawl through pipes. Kind of like Google's self-driving car, except for it's a robot with a fiber optic tail, and it crawls around and arrives in people's toilets. Google did an April Fool's trick on this once, but actually it was a real company. There's other guys want to shine laser beams through windows or whatever, all these companies. And there was going to be great competition, 4 or 5 choices of broadband. It'll be $5 a month or whatever. All those companies died. All dead, gone, buried. There's like a few clinging on to life, very, very small sectors of the economy, but none of them have emerged as serious competition. So we kind of went at competition, and it wasn't very successful. And I think it's hard, in fact, for government to say, okay, we're going to make competition happen. Because if companies are like, wow, we see all those companies tried this, and they're all dead. It's kind of like those scenes in a movie where there's like some dude with a samurai with a sword, or and he's killed like 20 guys. You're like, who wants to go next? Nobody. And people look in last mile internet access as like being chopped into small pieces by a master samurai. That's what it's like going in there. Actually, I'm giving Verizon and Comcast 2 credit by calling them samurais, but they're very good at destroying competitors. So the other choice then is rate regulation. As you just say, okay, well, look, cable internet, and I'm wary about this, but let me talk, and I'm not sure this is the right answer, but let me see how it works. So Comcast, cable, to provide you with internet, Time Warner, it costs them about $3 a month to provide you your internet access. They charge somewhere between, I don't know do you know your bill? You don't have to tell us if you don't want.
Like $150 a month.
Like 150. The cost of them, you might be a slightly bigger infrastructure, but like $3, $4, $5. So their them profit margins are typically between 97 and 99.9%. So maybe there's a point at which you say, you know what? Maybe we just need to say this is going to be a monopoly, and like this is a utility monopoly, and like Con Ed, who's not allowed to charge whatever prices they want, because then they would charge everything you have. Why wouldn't they? You say, all right. Well, when you have something, imagine a lecture company was completely unregulated. And they're like, okay, how does $500 a month sound? That sounds bad. Okay, how does not having electricity sound? Okay, $500 sounds okay all of a sudden. And internet has become like that. I mean, it's not like you can just say, okay, I'm going to go without internet. Or like, oh, I'm going to rely on my cell phone to do my work. I'm going to type all my emails on my cell phone. Sometimes I try and do that in a hotel. Like, what the fuck am I doing? Sorry about swearing. But like, why am I, because I'm trying to avoid whatever stupid hotel fee or whatever. So at some point you should say, this is crazy. This is just affecting poor middle class people, everybody. And why are we letting this happen? So, I'm not sure I'm 100% there. I think competition is the better answer. But if you have years and years of inflated prices, no competition, at some point you have to say, this price is too damn high. Sure.
Hi, my name is Akiva Miller. I also work at a tech company, I guess a lot of people. I want to ask you a somewhat academic question about
Sure.
neutrality. In your book, The Master Switch, I mean, you describe the worlds of tech where there were monopolies, and you sort of describe those worlds as not uniformly bad. There were some advantages. And now,
right.
the internet companies are saying, someone has to pay for the cost of infrastructure and the broadband and all of that. How do you see the world without net neutrality? What would be the positive sides, and then what are going to be the refutation to that? So play a bit of devil's advocate.
Sure. World without net neutrality. Let me riff on something from, he mentioned my book. I'm not unbooked or anything, but I'm going to bring something up because I've learned something more about politics than from my book. So I think there's a lot of similarity in the natural life cycle of companies and politicians. And it's a little bit like this. Successful companies who then become dominant or monopolistic companies, at the very beginning, when they first kind of come to power, are often very good. Now, sometimes they they become dominant through bad reasons, some kind of sneaky business. But very often, especially in the internet economy, they have a great product. I mean, look at Google search engine. When it started, was just so much better than other ones. Or Facebook in the very early days, better than MySpace, Friendster, that kind of thing. So they get there on the merits often, and they have a period when they achieve dominance, they hit scale, and almost there's a golden age for a little while. And I think a lot of politicians are like that, right? In the beginning, they get there, let's say in Congress or leader of a country, and idealistic, that people believe in them, and they do some great stuff for a while. Then there comes a crucial moment. I need to have a word for this moment that I don't have it. I'll call it a turning point. And it's when a politician or a company becomes less interested in doing good things, less interested in improving its product in order to stay in power, and starts to think it needs to destroy its competitors or create enormous barriers to ever being challenged. That critical moment is where things go seriously downhill. And then it gets worse, and then if you're talking about, if you imagine in Congress, some of the people in Congress, after they've been there like 5, 6, 8 terms, all they care about is staying in power. And they've like mastered that. And then, the rest, doesn't matter. It's only about staying in power. And some companies, at some point, they've been around, like AT&T Monopoly in the 60s, they'd been in power for like 70 years. They just owned communications in America. And they'd be like, all right, we'll improve it with like call waiting. The whole internet thing was not interesting them. So you have this very similar structure. It's a problem because that's how economies stagnate. That's how countries stagnate, is when the barriers to entry become too high. So this is a slightly academic. Let me answer really quickly, what's the world like without net neutrality? I would rewind the clock to about 2000 and say, 2002, what if the cable companies had just started blocking stuff, and phone companies, DSL, blocking stuff and getting away with it, there was no scrutiny and they got away with it? Well, I think you have a very different internet environment in the following ways. I'll start with one very clear one. Yahoo beats Google. Google's advantage was just so much quicker. Well, what if Google was like, in 2002, 2003, just kind of slow? Like it was maybe a little better quality, but just kind of slow. I think Yahoo starts to win. Friendster, MySpace, owned by News Corporation, facing off against Facebook. I think they find a way to defeat them by partnering with the companies. Microsoft, assuming it had no anti-competitive forces, holds on to Explorer and makes Explorer much more clearly the dominant browser, and then uses that to favor its own products, maybe search engines, whatever else Microsoft thinks of. And so I think you have a world where we look at the internet economy and we say, it's such a great, vibrant there were all these new companies, but I guess, it didn't really last. It was just the 90s or whatever. I mean, the difference is right now, we still have a vibrant internet economy, and I don't think net neutrality is the only reason, but I think it's one of the reasons, because net neutrality, which I obviously believe in, what it fundamentally does is it levels the playing field between really big companies and smaller companies. Not 100%, not totally. You don't get the corporate jet. You don't necessarily get the free cafeteria. You don't have necessarily as nice an office, but you can reach your customers in relatively similar form, and if they like it, your product can take off. That is the crucial thing that happens. You get a chance. That's all entrepreneurs want, I think, is a chance. That's all anyone wants. I think all of us, when you think about it, when you think about what you want to do in life, as I said about like the hot dog versus the business, bulletin board system. If you fail, you want to fail for the right reasons. If you succeed, well, no one cares why they succeed. But if you fail, if your product isn't popular, it's easy to take that. You can accept it. But if you feel it wasn't a fair game, you feel that the winners won for the wrong reasons, it's very frustrating as a system, as a life. When you feel the system is rigged, why be a part of it? And I think that's important in politics, it's important in the economy. It sounds like a very basic principle, but I think it's actually crucial to a wealthy and happy society. Last question? Okay, one last question. How are we doing on time? Good.
Can you talk a little bit about how antitrust can be a useful tool in order to address the fragility that comes from an over-centralized system?
Yeah, it's a good question. Very challenging question. Well, antitrust can do two things. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to be a law school professor, my regular job. Antitrust does two things. First of all, the point of antitrust, when you go back to the original foundational ideas of antitrust law has been lost as an important part of our society today. It was once a national electoral issue. I went back to one of the inspirations for my campaign is the 1912 Progressive Party, which I think had a lot of great ideas, Theodore Roosevelt's party. And Louis Brandeis, Woodrow Wilson, I think these guys were great. And one of the things they believed was that an overly centralized economy was inconsistent with the American idea of citizenship. Because they believed if the economy was composed, this goes back to your earlier question, of just massive, gigantic entities, men and women will be cogs in a machine and will not be the citizens they are supposed to be. They also believed you didn't have enough leisure time. If we work all the time, this is a problem today. Work all the time, you don't have time just to sort of think about anything else at all, and therefore you become too narrow, and again, we lose this sense of citizenship, this sense of a real democracy, of a republic. So it's a fragile thing. How can the antitrust law help? The antitrust law came into being to try to preserve America as a more decentralized place. It failed, but that was its idea. But it's never too late. First of all, by blocking mergers, Comcast merger being an example, you keep the country slightly smaller, and we can move back with other factors towards a more decentralized vision of how this country works. The other thing I want to spend forever on antitrust. But remember how I talked about that tipping point, that moment where companies turn from trying to improve themselves to try to destroy their competitors, therefore entrench themselves? The antitrust law can say that is illegal. It is illegal to try to, it keeps them vulnerable so that the next company can come along, can challenge them. It prevents dirty tricks that companies use to try to keep themselves in power forever. How are we on time? Maybe I'll take one last question. Yeah. If there is a last question. Oh, this woman over here. Thank you for being patient with our antitrust lecture here. Great.
I had one small question, the other is a bit larger question. Is there a plan at all for New York City to provide public Wi-Fi everywhere, not just the parks and so on and so forth? Is that something that you foresee in the near future? And then the second thing is, which is a more longer question, is how would you incentivize, or do you have a plan to incentivize entrepreneurs to stay in New York City when the cost of living is so much, as opposed to going out of state or other tech hubs all across the U.S.? When you have a certain amount of funding and you want to keep your burn rate as low as possible, how would you incentivize them to stay here in New York City?
It's a challenge. Both of those are challenging questions. So the first is whether New York can experiment with more municipal Wi-Fi. I believe, and I think we should encourage municipalities to try offering alternatives in terms of broadband. As I pointed out to this gentleman right here, that the profit margins, this 99% profit margin, the $60 a month when it's only costing you $3 after you paid off expenses. But nonetheless, remember I said there's that big graveyard of companies who've tried that? There's a lot of graveyard of city efforts too. It's a tough problem. Last mile business, if any of you are trying to get into that business, I just want to say it's a really tough business. And you think about it, why? Well, okay, so you are entering a market, let's say you're trying to compete with Time Warner, even as a city, where people already have a functioning product, which they've played off all their infrastructure, and you have to convince people to switch. And so that's a little less with Wi-Fi, but nonetheless, doing the full, actually, municipal Wi-Fi could work. It requires an enormous cash outlay, and I think New York City has a lot of priorities that they're not willing to do it. People sort of thought, oh, we can just do it on the side, hook up a few. They kind of got this idea. Sometimes tech people, we are sometimes overly optimistic, and we got the idea, oh, we'll just buy a bunch of, Linksys things and throw them in trees, and that'll solve all the problems. And that didn't really work too well, because everyone knows that Wi-Fi doesn't really go further than 100 feet for a lot of reasons. So I encourage municipalities to try to solve the problem. I think it's really hard, and you need to invest serious money to do it, and then you have to be prepared to run the network, and that's challenging. How do you encourage people? Well, I actually think New York City tech I think New York City is an attractive place, and in fact, to counter the question, I don't think I would take enormous measures to try to make New York tech that much more popular. I think upstate, in fact, I think some tech companies are starting to think, well, maybe New York City is too expensive, and maybe not everything needs to be in one or two places. And maybe we'll start to see tech economies, and not only in New York, but upstate New York or other places around the country, because not everything needs to be concentrated here. There's reasons to be here, but if it doesn't make sense, in some ways, it's really hard to pick this industry and say we're going to lower their costs. So I actually don't really believe in special measures, because I think New York has a lot of good advantages as well. That doesn't walk away from the problems like rent and so forth, which I think are general problems. But as for special measures for New York tech, I'm not a big believer, sorry, but I guess that's consistent with my philosophy. Anyway, thank you so much. I'm so glad you came out to hear me. And remember, the primary is September 9th. If you're a New York resident, please come out and vote. Thanks so much.